LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the October 29th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I picked out the weekend's 16 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really informative, educational, fair use media criticism and political analysis show for you all tonight. The one political comedy source I have will be a clip from the monologue on Real Time with Bill Maher on HBO last Friday. And beyond that, as usual, my clips come completely from the Sunday morning news analysis shows on the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. You can see the two topics I'm covering listed down in the video description. If you're watching this as a recorded show, I will put time indexes down there for you to switch between the topics, and actually you should be able to discover the bonus Sandy clips for the Sandy fans out there. I know there are Sandy fans, and so I have a Sandy still photo and a Sandy video that I will put probably in between the two topics. The shorter topic is the split in the Republican Party. I have about 5 clips on that, and then I think 11 clips on the Russia scandal. There'll be a little bit on the alternate universe Russia scandal they've been doing on Fox News, the Hillary Uranium One scandal, and the supposed scandal with the Democrats funding the Russian dossier on Donald Trump, and I will get to that as, like I said, the last 11 clips. But I want to start with the split in the Republican Party that would have been the big story if there weren't these pending indictments, or at least one indictment pending. Maybe if you're watching this as a recorded show, you already know who has been indicted. I'm going to give you a whole bunch of names if you want to start some sort of office pool. If you're watching this before the indictment, I'm going to give you a whole bunch of names that you can trade and bet on, or I don't know. I'm just joking about that. But speaking of jokes, I am going to start with my one political comedy clip, about a minute from Bill Maher's monologue on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, where he talked about the split in the Republican Party. Specifically, Senator Jeff Flake from Arizona, who gave this big, have you no decency speech in the Senate this last week, attacking Donald Trump, and also Senator Bob Corker. And I'll even have a clip from Senator Bob Corker a little bit later from CBS's Face the Nation. But first, here is the Real Time with Bill Maher monologue clip on the split in the Republican Party that I'm going to start with and discuss with you after we watch it together over here.
This week, Jeff Flake, the senator from Arizona. Yes, let's encourage him. Jeff Flake joined the resistance. He announced his retirement in a blistering speech on the Senate floor. He would denounce Trump for all he stands for and says he just can't be a part of this anymore. He's the Rose McGowan of the Republican Party. Except instead of the other Republicans joining him with their Me Too stories, they're continuing to let Trump molest him. That's the problem. And Jeff Flake is not a hippie. This is a hard right-winger who votes with Trump. Same thing with the other Republican of conscience, which is Bob Corker, who this week said Trump is utterly untruthful and he is debasing the country. That said, if he can sign our tax cut for the rich, debase away. Yeah, that's the problem.
So, yeah, I enjoyed both the Corker joke, which has to do with how they're still complicit. Even Corker and even Jeff Flake, it looks like they're both going to go along with this big tax cut for the rich, because you can be complicit with the evil of Donald Trump, even if you're calling him out and saying he's debasing the party, and the whole Jeff Flake. I'm going to show a question from using the Jeff Flake clip in just a minute. But before I get to that, I want to show a general news summary and meet the press. You would think NBC is supposedly the most left-leaning, especially MSNBC. Its partner network is supposedly the most left-leaning of all the corporate media news outlets. But NBC this morning did, at least in the beginning of the show, did not do much coverage of the Russia scandal, and especially with these pending indictments, they sort of folded it into this idea that Donald Trump has taken over the Republican Party and it's causing a split in the party, which it seems in a way almost like laziness on the part of NBC to me, because you'll see what Chuck Todd does is, he usually does this, is he does like a minute or so introduction that's live, and then they go to the package video with his narration. But what it seems to me like they had this whole package video, like over 3 minutes of package video, all prepared on the Republican Party split, and then like Friday afternoon, evening, it was like, I think around, I remember it was like at the end of All In with Chris Hayes and the beginning of Rachel Maddow on MSNBC, so that's like just before 9 o'clock Eastern time on Friday. So that's why there's also no mention of the Russia scandal in HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher on Friday, because it just broke a couple hours before that show started. So NBC's Meet the Press, they just sort of fold in briefly the whole Russia scandal, but they're actually focused mostly on the split in the Republican Party in this 4.5-minute introduction from Chuck Todd, which I think I've pre-criticized before you watch it. I know people complain I do that a lot, but I'll try not to repeat too much of my criticism after we watch the 4.5-minute clip together over here.
It's his party, and you can cry if you want to. However you view what's happened to the Republican Party over the past year, that President Trump has managed a hostile takeover, or that he's being greeted as a liberator, there's no question now that he has recreated the party in his own image. At least the base of his party in his own image. Beyond that, he's struggling. Our brand new NBC News Wall Street Journal poll out this morning shows President Trump's approval rating at a low for his presidency. 38% approve, 58% disapprove. It's actually down considerably from where Mr. Trump was just a month ago in the first aftermath of those hurricanes. It is also the lowest in modern times for a president in the first year of his presidency. And hanging over the president right now is this. NBC News has confirmed that a federal grand jury has approved the first indictment or indictments in special counsel Bob Mueller's Russia investigation, which could target one or more people. Anyone charged could be taken into custody as soon as tomorrow. Which leads to this question. Will President Trump's base care or even believe the charges? Because look at this. Among Republicans, the president is wildly popular. 81-17 approve, disapprove on the job he's doing. Republican voters seem to be pretty clear. They want President Trump's brand of conservatism, not the brand represented by the Republican Party establishment. That dynamic played out in the past few weeks when two Republican senators, not exactly moderates, mind you, Jeff Flake of Arizona and Bob Corker of Tennessee, openly criticized the president and decided not to run for re-election. And the Republican base seemed to say, good riddance.
We have actually great unity in the Republican Party.
The Republican Party is quickly becoming the party of Trump. This week, there was Republican resistance.
When we remain silent and fail to act, when we know that silence and inaction is the wrong thing to do because of political considerations, because we might make enemies, because we might alienate the base, we dishonor our principles.
You would think he would aspire to be the President of the United States and act like a President of the United States, but, you know, that's just not going to be the case.
But that resistance was met with silence by Republicans who have determined that it's better politics to accommodate Mr. Trump than to challenge him.
He was elected president. I'm going to work with him for the good of our country.
I don't think the American people want to see us up here yelling at each other.
The president has his own way of communicating, and look, it's worked.
But everyone shut up and do your job, is my view.
Arizona Senator Jeff Flake's announcement that he will retire rather than face a tough re-election fight follows the retirement announcements of Tennessee's Bob Corker and a series of House moderates, all members of this so-called Republican establishment. And on the 2017 campaign trail, Republican candidates for governor in New Jersey and Virginia are mimicking Mr. Trump's rhetoric on immigration.
When asked about deporting criminal illegals, Phil Murphy said,
"My bias is going to be having their back."
And on statues honoring the Confederacy.
I'm for keeping them up, and he's for taking them down.
And congressional Republicans have been hesitant to criticize candidates who appeal to the president's base, like Alabama's Roy Moore, who has argued that homosexuality should be against the law and Muslim Americans should not be allowed to serve in Congress. These Republicans are worried that they, like Senator Flake, will become targets of the Trump-friendly media.
Take your other colleagues with you. Mitch McConnell, goodbye. Ben Sasse, goodbye. John Cornyn, goodbye. Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins.
Former Trump chief strategist Steve Bannon has promised to defeat mainstream Republican candidates in 2018.
It's an open revolt, and it should be. They think that you're a group of morons.
And this week, allies of Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell declared war, attempting to discredit Bannon's brand of nationalism.
This is a person who has a racially charged view of the world that not only do not most Americans find problematic, but most Republicans would find problematic.
For now, Mr. Trump is winning battles over what the Republican Party stands for. But he may be creating a smaller party in the process. And the 2017 and 2018 ballot box will decide whether the president wins the war to reshape his party.
Joining me now.
So you see Chuck Todd there. As I said, I pre-criticized that clip before I showed it. So instead of criticizing it again, I will point out that it was actually a really good summary of the split in the Republican Party, the Jeff Flake part, the Bob Corker part. If I have any criticism of the way it described the split in the Republican Party, it talked about moderates dropping out, but actually it's the moderates who are staying in who I think are showing that Trump hasn't, jumped the shark or reached the tipping point or whatever you want to say. And not the next clip. The next clip I'm going to show you is Senator Bob Corker. But after that, I have two moderates, one Republican moderate, Rob Portman from Ohio, and one Democratic moderate, Claire McCaskill from Missouri, both in, so-called swing states. And you'll see that they both they're saying we got to do our jobs and ignore Trump as much as possible and work in a bipartisan way. And so I previewed those two clips, I guess. But the next clip is actually Senator Bob Corker, who exclusively appeared on CBS's Face the Nation. And John Dickerson, for some reason, did not ask him at all about his big feud with Trump. And the comment you saw Bill Maher at the beginning say that, that Trump is debasing our democracy, that never came up in the John Dickerson interview, at least the part they aired on Face the Nation. The closest that he came was after talking about all these foreign policy issues and North Korea and how Bob Corker had criticized Donald Trump's foreign policy, issue-based. You'll see in this next clip, John Dickerson asks him a question about his national security criticisms and how other Republicans are telling him it's just like a squabble and it's not like a real thing. And you'll see Bob Corker's answer. And I really don't think CBS's Face the Nation got the most out of Bob Corker in their exclusive interview, given what you saw in that NBC Meet the Press story about the Republican Party split and how Bob Corker and, of course, Jeff Flake are, the two main splitters at the moment, at least the splitters who are quitters, I guess. And here's Bob Corker answering a not very probing question from John Dickerson on Face the Nation this morning here.
Are carrying out.
You're making a national security point here. Your colleagues seem not to have heard you. They have said that this is a family squabble. Ted Cruz compared it to a high school squabble. Others have said you're hurting the Republican Party by making these critiques. Is it just that they're not hearing what you're saying?
Well, look, John, each of us has an election certificate, and we try to do the best job that we can. Look, I care deeply about our country. It's why I ran for the Senate. I care even more deeply about it now, having been there 11 years. I've been in the foreign relations area the entire time I've been there. I'm chairman. I have coffees with Tillerson often. I talk with him. I talk with national security folks, not only here but around the world, and I have a good sense of what is happening. I'm just speaking to that. That's my job, and I'll continue to do so.
All right, Senator Corker, thanks so much for being with us.
So, yeah, that was not a very probing question from John Dickerson, and Bob Corker just gave a really evasive general answer. I've been around, I know what's happening. Well, you saw what he said, and given the huge feud he got in with Donald Trump, with Donald Trump doing all the tweets about little Bob Corker, spelled Liddle apostrophe. Maybe if I had Bob Corker on, I'd say, do you know what that Liddle apostrophe is supposed to mean? And That would be my, well, maybe not my first question, but it would definitely be one of my questions. So that is one of my criticisms of John Dickerson on CBS's Face the Nation. So don't come after me, CBS, for copyright infringement, because I gave criticism and commentary on that clip. You know, fair use up the wazoo. And now I want to get to those two Republican moderate clips that I promised earlier before the last clip, and I already kind of introduced them. One is Senator Rob Portman, senator from Ohio, definitely a swing state, over on NBC's Meet the Press, and as I kind of previewed, he doesn't really want to go after Donald Trump, and he tries to sort of, the big dodge is, I disagreed with Obama on policy too. Well, you didn't think that Obama was going to like blow up the world or tell people to go attack the who knows what Donald Trump's, I mean, he did tell people to, I wish they would punch that guy at some of his rallies. And anyway, I don't buy what Rob Portman says, but I'm also going to criticize the moderate Democrat Claire McCaskill after I show this Republican moderate Rob Portman from Ohio talking to Chuck Todd this morning here.
Play one excerpt from Jeff Flake's floor speech earlier this week. Here it is.
When the next generation asks us, why didn't you do something? Why didn't you speak up? What are we going to say? Mr. President, I rise today to say enough.
Do you share Senator Flake's concern? He almost sees this as an existential crisis that President Trump is bringing upon the country when it comes to sort of political discourse or democracy. Do you share that concern?
So President Trump was elected, duly elected, including winning by 8 points in Ohio, as you know, which is an overwhelming victory in my state. We've got to be sure that he succeeds, because when he succeeds, the country succeeds. So, I was not someone who at the end was able to vote for him, but when he was elected, I said, I'm going to work with him on tax reform, on addressing this opioid crisis, which you're going to talk about later with the fire chief from West Virginia. And, I think and that's our job. Our job is to actually get some things done here and help to influence the administration toward accomplishing things that people care about.
So because he won your state, you overlook things that concern you?
Well, no,
about his presidency?
He won the presidency. He's our,
right. No, I understand
he's
that.
our president. And just as I worked with President Obama and President Clinton before him when I didn't agree with them on a lot of stuff, I think that's my job. I mean, I'm just talking about my job. I think it's to set an example of bipartisanship and civility and get things done.
You think character still counts in American politics?
Of course. Yeah, of course character counts. And look, I don't agree with every tweet. As you know, I've spoken up on occasion. And yet, if you're focused on the tweets and not focused on actually accomplishing what people are looking to have happen for them and their family, I think you are getting out of touch with the American people.
I want to also...
So that was pretty weak. I may disagree with him on policy. Well, like I said, I pre-criticized that clip before I showed it. I don't really have to go into much more on that. But one... I don't know what that was all about. A little weird flash on the screen. But I also want to criticize the Democrat, as I promised. This is Senator Claire McCaskill from, well, it could be Missouri or Missouri, depending on the way you like to pronounce it. That actually, you'll see, comes up at the end of the clip. And I actually lived in Missouri or Missouri for about 5 years. I finished law school there, and I was a public defender there. And one of the things that really struck me about Missouri, St. Louis City and St. Louis County, and then the rural areas where I also worked as a public defender, because there's a state public defender system. And so when you're a public defender in Missouri, even though I worked in St. Louis County, I would be the conflict public defender for county offices way far away in Missouri. If, that means if they're like co-defendants, and so the office can't represent both people, they represent one person, and then they get a public defender from some other office to represent the second person. And sometimes there are like multiple people, so they have to get like all these different offices to send public defenders anyway. So I was a public defender in both rural Missouri and in urban Missouri. And coming from Southern California, I was really struck with the racism in the criminal justice system there. That's, of course, where Michael Brown was shot. Ferguson, Missouri was in St. Louis County where I worked. So I've talked about this many times. But what really strikes me about what Claire McCaskill is about to say, as I pre-criticized this clip, so I'll try not to repeat myself too much after I show it, but Claire McCaskill never says words like white supremacy or racism. She talks about cultural issues, and you'll notice she mentions like urban versus rural issues, and even at the end, as I promised, Chuck Todd will delineate the difference between Missouri and Missouri, and I will talk about it a little bit more, although I pre-criticized it after we watched that clip together over here.
You said something recently that sort of caught my eye, made me chuckle a little bit. You referenced a couple of cable news hosts, and you said 30% of Missouri is worrying about what one cable news host says, 20% is worried about another, and you said, and half the state's watching Dancing with the Stars. And your focus on the folks, you say, I try to focus on the folks watching Dancing with the Stars. Who are the Dancing with the Stars voters?
They are single moms that don't know if they can afford to send their kids to camp. They are two working parents that are making a combined income of less than $100,000 that are trying to figure out whether or not they can get to their child's soccer practice because they have to work extra hours because they're trying to put money in a retirement account. They are families living paycheck to paycheck. They are way too busy with their lives to worry about all this political noise. And frankly, they voted for me and for Mitt Romney. They voted for Donald Trump and Jason Kander. They will vote for a Democrat and a Republican if they believe they're authentic, they're telling the truth, and they're working hard.
You know, but let me ask it this way then. Why is the Democratic brand in such a bad standing in so many parts of Missouri?
I think there's cultural issues that Donald Trump was, I think, very smart to emphasize that have made it hard sometimes for us to relate. Sometimes those people watching Dancing with the Stars, they're not getting into the details of what we're doing on Pell Grants. They are rather saying, hey, I can't afford college, you know, give it to me straight.
Right.
And they don't think they've gotten it straight. And we get kind of lost in the weeds, and the cultural issues divide cities and the rural areas. I got to figure out a way to knit all that together. Right. And after doing almost 50 town halls, I'll tell you this, they want us to quit fighting with each other. That's what they want.
All right, Senator McCaskill, I'll leave it there. I'm curious, did you visit more places in Missouri or Missouri?
You know, I say both because I'm from both places, but definitely more places in rural areas where President Trump won by very large margins. And I've spent time out there trying to listen and make sure I understand their frustration. A
lot more Missouri then, I think, than Missouri. All right. Yeah. Thanks very much. When we come back.
So I thought that was kind of a revealing Democratic moderate response. I criticized it pretty much. I mean, the whole... I think you saw right there at the end pretty clearly that it was the cultural issues that divide the city from the rural areas, from, you know, Missouri from Missouri. I think what we're talking about there is racism, white supremacy, although Claire McCaskill, the actual issues she was talking about were working class issues, but they're not actually mutually exclusive. The working class resentments that result from globalization and the inability of people with not high levels of education to earn the same high wages they earned after World War II, when the United States was one of the few areas in the world that wasn't decimated by war. And so the United States really enjoyed a huge economic advantage starting after World War II and going all the way to like the 70s, and that's when there started to be some competition. And at this point, the United States is one economy among several, and that's just a reality of globalization. Now, whether globalization is a bad thing, that actually, I recently watched a really good argument about that in a conversation between Angela Davis and Michelle Alexander, the author of The New Jim Crow, that I've had right up there over my shoulder for quite a long time. But anyway, that is a huge departure from any of the topics I'm covering, so I guess I'll end my split in the Republican Party clips there with my criticisms of Democrat Claire McCaskill from Missouri, or Missouri if you like. I noticed along the way that I did get a nice super chat contribution from Patrice Gonzalez asking me a question about a topic I'm not covering, so I will talk about it briefly as I'm switching topics. So I really appreciate the super chat contributions. That really defrays the loss of ad revenue that I'm still suffering from YouTube. Patrice there was asking about how do we define the middle class for tax reform, which I'm not really covering tax reform, but I mean, the real easy answer is it's the middle third of income earners, and based on like some bell curve distribution, you just take the middle third, and what the actual numbers are, it depends on whether you're talking about an individual or a couple or a family of four, and it even varies from different locations where there are different costs of living, and so like San Francisco is one of the most expensive places to live, and it's a lot more expensive to live there than some of the places in Missouri that I was talking about before. So it's hard to give exact numbers, but I think I'm not covering tax reform, but one of the big things they're talking about is lowering the corporate tax rate, which applies to the people who do pass-through corporations, including Donald Trump, from what I understand. I think they're called S corporations, and about 80% of the benefits from that decrease in taxes goes to people who earn $1 million or more. And of course there's the estate tax, which only applies to estates that are over I think it's like $5.9 million for individuals, and like double that for couples. So that's like a very tiny percentage of people. So I appreciate the question from Patrice Gonzalez, and the whole tax reform thing was covered somewhat on the Sunday morning news analysis shows. There were several questions to the newsmakers, but I just decided to keep it to the two topics. And before I get to the next topic, I also promised that I would have the bonus Sandy clips. I wasn't sure if I would have a video clip of Sandy, because you can see she was like lying in her bed there again, and she looked very tired, but I'm happy to tell you that she did come lie down. I didn't actually get the video of her lying down, but right before I started the show, I asked Sandy if she was ready, and she was ready. Sandy, ready for the show? Ready for the show? Sandy, ready for the show? So there you go, the bonus Sandy clips for the big Sandy fans out there. And now I am going to give you the 11 clips that I put together on the Russia scandal, mostly on the possible breaking news of an indictment or multiple indictments by the special counsel Robert Mueller, and I will have a couple clips on the alternate universe Russia scandal on Fox News about Uranium One, and also the Russian dossier being funded by Democrats. But I don't know if this is going to lead to impeachment. Several times I've noticed that the first comment I get on my live stream video is impeach the peach. And in honor of the possibility of impeachment growing this week with this news, I have worn this peach, maybe Trump-colored shirt, and that's for the Russia scandal topic that I'm going to start with this first clip, which is, first I'm going to show you 4 of the 5 corporate news outlets summarizing this. I'm not going to show CBS's Face the Nation because it was not much more informative than the basic facts, which are that news sources, it was first NBC and then I think Reuters and one other news outlet, confirmed that there's a pending indictment or indictments from Robert Mueller. It could be something like Paul Manafort from years ago, or it could be some person we've never heard of, or very few of us have heard of. And I'll give you lists of names, like I said at the beginning, that you can bet on. But first, here's a CNN State of the Union where Jake Tapper sort of gave us the tension of watching and waiting in this 1-minute summary that is as good as any over here.
Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is watching and waiting. In less than 24 hours, the first person could be taken into custody in the Russia investigation. On Friday, a Washington grand jury approved the first charges in the probe into possible collusion with Russia by the Trump team, led by special counsel Robert Mueller. While the charges right now are still sealed, sources say anyone charged could be taken into custody as early as Monday. We do not know at this point who might be facing charges or for what. Mueller has issued grand jury subpoenas for documents and testimony related to former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort and former National Security Advisor General Michael Flynn. The White House has not commented on the development, and the president has been silent on the general topic since news of the charges broke. But in a new interview conducted before Friday, White House lawyer Ty Cobb told the New York Times that the president is not worried that his associates have any damaging information about him. Let's get right to Preet Bharara. He's a former U.S. attorney and
actually, I don't have any clips of Preet Bharara, though he gave some really interesting information, but he's a CNN legal analyst, so he's kind of a pundit. I try to stick to the newsmakers, not the pundits, and try to do my own punditry, and I actually used to be a criminal defense attorney, so I know a little bit about grand juries and indictments, and I will use that. I will be committing legal analysis during this show when I get to the topic. Also, down in the video description, I forgot to mention that there you can find the link to the clip list of my 16 clips that I look at my notes and try to figure out what I meant when I wrote these cryptic notes on each clip, and that's usually the criticism that I'm giving based on those notes, so you can follow that along. But I also have the source of all the clips, and I also have links that I haven't had for several weeks, but now with the idea of campaign finance violations and also obstruction of justice back on the table as a possible eventual crime for Trump and his administration, I have links to the federal statutes that define those crimes. I think there are at least 3 different links to the U.S. Code for obstruction of justice. There's also a long analysis of the history of obstruction of justice charges from the Congressional Research Service that is, I think, really informative. I have a link to that down in the video description. So I showed the CNN State of the Union clip, which, like I said, was as good as any of them. I also like the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos summary of what happened, and it's about the same length. It's just a minute long, and I'll discuss it with you after we watch it together over here.
From the start of his presidency, the Russia investigation has bedeviled President Trump. He's raged about it in private, railed against it in public, calling it fake news, a witch hunt. It's caused him to fire FBI Director James Comey, a dramatic move that directly triggered the appointment of special counsel Robert Mueller. And now, 5 months into his work, Mueller's grand jury has approved charges against his first target. Who that target is, what those charges are, still unknown. But an indictment and arrest could be announced as early as tomorrow, which means the fallout has just begun.
Mueller's also looking into the financial dealings of a number of key Trump associates, including former campaign manager Paul Manafort and former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Sources close to Manafort say they've been given no indication any charges against him are imminent, and we've got no response from people close to Michael Flynn. While it's unclear how significant these first charges will be, it does send a clear message that prosecutors believe a crime has been committed, and shows everyone involved probably needs to take stock that this is a serious matter, George.
Which means all eyes will be on that court.
All eyes will be on that court if there's going to be an actual arrest or when they disclose the indictments. And I edited together a couple clips there. First, the introduction from George Stephanopoulos, and then that news report from senior justice correspondent Pierre Thomas, where he talked about the two possible indictees, or the two big fish, if it's going to be a big fish, which would be Paul Manafort, and some of his possible crimes predate the Trump campaign. So that's, I'm sure, what Trump will say is, this has nothing to do with the Trump campaign. This was something that happened 5 years ago. I even saw, I think it was Trey Gowdy in a clip that I am going to show a Trey Gowdy clip a little later, but not where he said that, 15 years ago, the Paul Manafort stuff in the Ukraine happened. But I think that the thing that was interesting there is that Pierre Thomas seemed to indicate, Paul Manafort said that, or spokespeople for Paul Manafort said that he didn't think that he was the target, or he hadn't heard anything, but then the spokespeople for Michael Flynn didn't return their calls, which makes you think maybe it's going to be Michael Flynn. Though a little later I'll show a clip from Representative Adam Schiff that makes it sound a lot more like it's going to be Paul Manafort. But before that, I will show an NBC Meet the Press clip, even though they didn't cover it in their introduction very well, as I criticized earlier. They did give a long list of people who have gone before the congressional committees or talked to Robert Mueller who might be indicted. But before I get to that, I want to show the worst clip of all, the way that it was spun over on Fox News Sunday. It was all about the in the introduction, their summary before Chris Wallace comes on and says good morning. It was all about Hillary Clinton and her collusion with Russia, and then finally, after the introduction, he came in with the latest news about the possible indictments, but then, of course, goes right back to the Hillary Clinton scandal in the introduction and posted. This is, again, two clips I've edited together. I cut out the parts where they talked about tax reform and some other issues in the very beginning of Fox News Sunday, but I have the very, very beginning of Fox News Sunday and then the good morning part edited together, a little under 2 minutes here.
Year after the 2016 election, was it Hillary Clinton and the Democrats who colluded with the Russians?
She denied it. Her own people denied it. Everybody denied it. And now they're sort of scooting around trying to figure out what to say.
Who in the Clinton campaign approved paying for the Russia dossier on Donald Trump? And did they break the law? And what does it mean for the investigation into Russian collusion with the Trump campaign? We'll ask House Oversight Committee Chair Trey Gowdy, only on Fox News Sunday. Then, the GOP revolt.
It's obvious his political model and governing model is to divide.
I have children and grandchildren to answer to, and so, Mr. President, I will not be complicit or silent.
What do Republican attacks on the president mean for the future of the party? We'll talk with Ohio Governor John Kasich, a Trump critic. It's a Fox News Sunday exclusive. We begin with the latest reports. At least one person has been charged in connection with Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 election. The reports say a federal grand jury approved the charges Friday. Those charges have been sealed by a judge, and anyone facing charges could be taken into custody as soon as tomorrow. Meanwhile, House Republicans are launching new investigations into Hillary Clinton, including the revelation that her campaign and the Democratic National Committee paid for opposition research that led to the Russia dossier that accused the Trump campaign of collusion with the Russians.
So that's the alternate universe coverage of the Russian scandal, the way Fox News has been really beating the drum on the Hillary Clinton scandals, the 7-year-old Uranium One deal, which is bogus for reasons I will discuss when I get to the Uranium One clips, and also the funding of the dossier, opposition research, even if it involves investigating what Trump did in Russia and how Russia was involved with Trump. That is not the same thing as actually working, the June 16th meeting between Donald Trump Jr. and what was her name, Natalie Volotskaya. I can never remember all those long Russian names. You'll have to forgive me. I think it's pretty close, but very close to that. And some people thought that this big Hillary Clinton scandal was brewed up this week because Trump and Fox News and those people knew that the indictments were coming. I think it might have been this Natalie Volotskaya story, if I'm getting her name even close to right, where it just came out this week that, she wasn't just some Russian lawyer. She had the same talking points that Vladimir Putin used, and that came from the chief prosecutor or whatever the name of that official is in Russia, who is basically the Russian attorney general. They all had these same talking points, which is basically this Uranium One scandal and bad information on Hillary Clinton and bribery and that's all pretty much ridiculous. But before I get to the newsmakers on this, there's an Adam Schiff clip I want to get to in just a minute. But I did criticize NBC's Meet the Press for having very little coverage of the Russian scandal in the beginning of their program. I think because they already had put all this work into their package about the Republican split, which you also saw Fox News Sunday covered, and all the networks covered the Republican split as well. But I did want to give NBC News and Meet the Press Chuck Todd credit for the list of the lesser-known people who may also be the subject of indictments. The other news programs I showed were talking about Paul Manafort and General Michael Flynn, and that's because those are the two big Trump associates who we know probably committed a crime. Especially Michael Flynn apparently lied to the FBI, and Paul Manafort has all these shady financial dealings. But there are other names that may come up tomorrow. Flynn and Manafort are the big fish bets, but some of the little fish are mentioned in this about 75-second clip from Meet the Press for their panel discussion. But I don't have the panel discussion, but I do have the list of names from Chuck Todd from this morning here.
That could be the biggest stumbling block. It's the Russia investigation. All right, as we said earlier this week, I want to run down some things here. We learned that special counsel will present some sort of indictment tomorrow. The past 2 weeks have seen many high-profile names being questioned by Mueller's team or by congressional committees. Let me run through them. October 13th, it was former White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus, interviewed by the team Mueller. October 16th, the former press secretary Spicer, interviewed by Mueller. October 18th, it was Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski, interviewed by the Senate Intel Committee. October 24th and 25th, Michael Cohen, the president's personal lawyer, appeared both in front of the House and Senate Intel Committees. The 24th, Brad Parscale, the head of the Trump digital campaign team, he was interviewed by the House. And October 27th, Carter Page, the Forrest Gump of all of this, a foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign by the Senate Intel Committee. And the president has been all over this, trying to turn this into a Clinton investigation. Right. And in fact, it got so absurd. Listen to Corey Lewandowski on the air a couple days ago.
Give me a break, okay? Look, the speculation is so insane right now. What we should be focusing on are the continued lies of the Clinton administration.
The Clinton administration.
I didn't remember that. I didn't know that happened.
Can Trump turn this around?
Clinton administration, Chuck Todd and Meet the Press, they have their own political comedy going on. Not just, I forgot to mention in the very first Meet the Press clip I showed, he had that whole, it's Trump's party and you can cry if you want to. That was actually a not bad joke from Chuck Todd at the very beginning of the show that I forgot to praise after criticizing their coverage. And I also need to praise that list there of, there were some people in there who I did not really recognize the names. Most of them I recognized, and also including that Corey Lewandowski clip at the end. That's just classic from Fox and Friends. It's makes me think maybe I should do some Fox News bias videos again, because especially now that Fox and Friends is like the favorite show of the Commander-in-Chief, we really have to show the bias on Fox and Friends, which was always the most skewed, biased of all the Fox News well, there's also the O'Reilly factor, which is gone by the wayside, and it used to be Hannity and Colmes, and now it's what the Hannity, it's just called Hannity, I think now, or whatever. I barely watch that stuff. Why would I? Why would anyone? But some people do, and one of the most important, powerful people who watches it is the Commander-in-Chief, President Donald J. Trump. So I showed all those different news summaries, and I want to get to the newsmakers now. The next clip is Adam Schiff, I promised, making the argument that it's actually going to be Paul Manafort who is indicted tomorrow or sometime in the near future, or has been indicted, and the indictment will become public tomorrow. And this is kind of in contrast to a senior justice correspondent for ABC, Pierre Thomas, on the This Week with George Stephanopoulos clip, where at least the target of the indictment should probably know that something's coming, most likely. And the spokespeople for Paul Manafort told ABC they didn't know anything was coming, and the spokespeople for Michael Flynn didn't answer, which makes you think, ooh, maybe something's coming. But Adam Schiff makes it sound like it's going to be Paul Manafort. At least that's my analysis. You can tell me what you think down in the comment section as we watch this little under 90-second clip together over here.
Your reaction to this news that there may be a sealed indictment?
Well, you know, there are two people, I think, just from press reporting, that it is likely to be either Mike Flynn or Paul Manafort. We haven't been informed of who it is, and I don't think it would have been appropriate for Bob Mueller to tell us. If it is Paul Manafort, and he has apparently told others that he expects to be indicted, it may help us answer one very central question in the investigation, and that is, we know that the Russian government, through intermediaries, was reaching out to the Trump campaign, reaching out to Paul Manafort and others, and offering information on Hillary Clinton they thought would help the Trump campaign, and that the campaign was willing and accepted that idea. We also know from the Washington Post reporting that contemporaneous with that, Paul Manafort is reaching out in the other direction to the Kremlin through oligarchs like Oleg Deripaska, offering information on the campaign in exchange for money he believed was owed him for work in Ukraine for a pro-Russia party. The question is, who gave what to whom as a result of these overtures? But the fact that these requests are moving in opposite directions, and what information, of course, would Mr. Manafort have to offer the Russians? Well, what would the president do on sanctions? That would be the most important information the Kremlin would want. So if it is him, it may ultimately help us answer those questions.
How about this question of the president?
So, yeah, as I pre-criticized that clip or pre-commented, that definitely Adam Schiff makes it sound like it's Paul Manafort. I guess maybe if you're watching this after the indictments have become public, you may know, and so, but I'm like in suspense, and as to why they're secret, actually indictments, when a grand jury testimony and that kind of thing is supposed to be secret, it's a crime to reveal what happens inside the grand jury. But once the grand jury issues an indictment, that's supposed to be public. That's one of the great things about our criminal justice system, is that we all get to see publicly what the supposed facts are in these prosecutions. But a judge has decided to keep these indictments secret for some short period of time for some reason, and then someone leaked the existence of the indictments, which could be a crime, but it's only a crime if you're a member of the prosecution team or a member of the grand jury. If you're like the person who's getting indicted and you've received notice you're getting indicted, or you're the defense attorney, or you've testified to the grand jury, then you can talk about what you said to the grand jury if you're a witness, or if you know you're going to be indicted, and or you're the defense attorney, you're allowed to leak it. That's not a crime. And that's actually something that Christie says very briefly, but almost doesn't say it when he's talking to George Stephanopoulos in response to a question that is based on what Dan Abrams, a ABC legal analyst, I think, says about why it is they're keeping these indictments secret. And then Christie has his own explanation, which I'll discuss with you after we watch that clip together over here.
You keep it secret is you don't want the defendant to know. You don't want the defendant to try to destroy evidence. You don't want potential co-defendants to act out. It's specifically targeting the person who is going to be arrested and saying, we don't want this person to know.
And will you agree with Dan on why this is being kept secret right now?
Well, first off, it's supposed to be kept secret. I mean, let's remember, too, and Dan knows this, there are very strict criminal laws about disclosing grand jury information. Now, depending upon who disclosed this to CNN, it could be a crime.
Do you think it was Mueller's team?
Well, I would hope not. Because, listen, as a prosecutor, I can tell you, that was the thing that we emphasized the most with our prosecutors and our agents was, let me tell you something, we will prosecute you if we find out you leaked this stuff. Because we have to have the public have confidence in the fact that the grand jury system is secret and, as a result, fair. If you're leaking stuff out of the grand jury, which happens, but, you shouldn't be doing that. So, but again, we don't know who leaked it to CNN. It would be a crime if prosecutors or agents leaked it. If defense lawyers leaked it, it might be less.
And anybody who's been before a grand jury is allowed to talk about it.
Absolutely. But the people who have been before the grand jury wouldn't know that there were charges. You go in there, you testify, you get out. And so I think what's really important to focus on here today is what we don't know. And what we don't know is who this person is. We don't know what the charges are. We don't know anything except there's a report that someone says there'll be charges on Monday and that there's a sealed indictment. And so once that happens, we'll have a lot more to react to. But the one thing that's clear here is I heard someone say, are people nervous? Believe me, if you're the person, you know. I mean, you've already been told you're a target. Your lawyers have been, if you've been asked to come into the grand jury, they've got to advise you of your status as to whether you're a target. If you've been told you're a target, believe me, you're not sleeping well anyway.
But how?
And that, at least, the last part, I agree with New Jersey Governor Christie, that if you're a target of Robert Mueller's special counsel investigation, if you know you're a target, and now you know there are indictments and something's happening, you're not sleeping well anyway. But you notice he barely said in his answer there that it's not necessarily a crime to leak this if you're the defense attorney whose client has been indicted, or you're the person who's been indicted and you know you've been indicted. And it may be that they've informed the person, and the reason it's been sealed is to avoid a media circus, allow the person to come up with some sort of voluntary surrender deal that is out of view of the media. Or it could be that they don't, sometimes they seal the indictment so that people don't destroy evidence or flee the country, or sometimes they seal indictments so that if they want to get the person to flip on someone higher up, they don't want the higher up people to know that the person who's been indicted has been indicted, so they can make them wear a wire or something like that. That's some of the pundits said some of this stuff on the show, but I'm giving my own punditry based on my own criminal justice experience. Although it has been several years, I did spend about 5 years as a public defender, first in Missouri and Missouri, and then here in California. In California, I mostly did misdemeanors, but I worked both for the Missouri State Public Defender System, and then as a law clerk for a year before that for the Federal Public Defender in St. Louis, so I even know a little bit about the federal system, which involves a lot more grand juries. But I want to get to the alternate universe of Trey Gowdy over on Fox News Sunday. But before I get to, this is actually a pair of clips. The first one, before I get to the pair of clips of Trey Gowdy and Adam Schiff talking about the dossier, I want to show how over on Fox News Sunday, this is a very quick clip of Chris Wallace letting Trey Gowdy get away with what Christie didn't quite get away with in that last clip, where he briefly mentioned that the defense attorneys could leak this and it wouldn't be a crime. And actually on CBS's Face the Nation, he actually said it was definitely a crime to leak this. And I didn't take that clip where John Dickerson didn't follow up on that. But that's also what Chris Wallace did not follow up when Trey Gowdy claimed it was definitely a crime to leak the information about this indictment, even though it could be not a crime if it's the defense attorney or the person indicted. That's this clip.
Let's start with the report from several news outlets that the first Mueller charges will be announced tomorrow. As a former federal prosecutor yourself, What will you be looking for?
Well, first of all, Chris, we don't know who's being charged. Let's assume arguendo the reporting is true. We don't know who's being charged. We don't know what they're being charged for. We don't know the time period. I will tell you this. The only conversation I've had with Robert Mueller, it was stressing to him the importance of cutting out the leaks with respect to serious investigations. So it is kind of ironic that the people charged with investigating the law and executing the law would violate the law. And make no mistake, disclosing grand jury material is a violation of the law. So as a former prosecutor, I'm disappointed that you and I are having the conversation because somebody violated their oath of secrecy.
Let's handicap this, though, if you will, sort of expert analysis as a federal.
So, yeah, I just included that last little part to show that Chris Wallace did not follow up at all, as I said before the clip, even though Trey Gowdy claimed it's a crime to leak this information, but not necessarily a crime. I already explained that before I showed the clip, and I also previewed the dueling clips between Trey Gowdy and Adam Schiff on the Steele dossier, this British spy who was hired by Fusion GPS as opposition research, and it's not actually a crime to pay for opposition research, as I said at the beginning of the program, even if it involves foreign sources. If you're, actually paying for services rendered, in-kind contribution, no, not in-kind, strike that, not in-kind contribution, but fees for services rendered. If you're paying for the value you receive, that's not receiving something of value, that's paying for something that you actually receive. It's not what happened supposedly with Donald Trump. And anyway, that's getting a little bit into the weeds. So I want to get to these dueling clips as to whether this dossier, that some of the stuff has never been corroborated, that, the famous golden shower information is in this dossier, but some stuff has been corroborated. And I'll discuss that a little more after we watch the dueling clips between Trey Gowdy, bringing up this whole supposed Hillary Clinton scandal on Fox News Sunday, talking to Chris Wallace, and then kind of refuted by Adam Schiff talking to George Stephanopoulos on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. And then I'll have a final CBS Face the Nation clip where I think the moderate Senator Susan Collins from Maine actually brings up the only part of the dossier scandal that could actually be a scandal. But that's the third clip. Here's the first of those three clips over here.
Turn to the revelation this week that it turns out that the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee paid for the opposition research that led to the writing, the formulation of this Russia dossier that makes all kinds of accusations against President Trump and his campaign. What do you think is the significance of that revelation?
Well, one of the areas of significance, Chris, is just how hard the Democrats in Congress fought Republicans for trying to gain access to this information. If it were up to Adam Schiff and other Democrats, who, of course, want all the facts to come out, they want all the facts of Russia to come out, except who financed the dossier. So that's the most important thing to me, is how unserious the Democrats in the House have been about uncovering all the facts. I am interested in who paid for the dossier because that helps you understand motive and intent and whether or not you can rely on the document. I am much more interested in whether or not the Department of Justice and the FBI relied upon that dossier in initiating a counterintelligence investigation or in court filings. That is really important to me. I don't expect the DNC to be objective. Almost by definition, opposition research is not objective. I do expect an entity represented by a blindfolded woman to be objective, and if they relied on that dossier and they didn't corroborate it, or vet it, then we have a serious issue, and that's the next thing that House Intel is trying to find out, is whether or not the U.S. government relied on it.
Yeah, let me ask you about that, because the 2 points you're making, and I agree, these are two very important questions. Did the FBI base its original investigation, at least in part, on the dossier? And when you talk about court representations, that's the possibility that they used the dossier to convince a FISA court to allow the FBI to wiretap people in Trump world, Trump associates. Do you have any evidence of that? I understand the investigation is just beginning.
Well, actually, the investigation is not just beginning. We've been trying for a long time to get the Department of Justice to give us access to this information. It frankly took the Speaker of the House this week to tell the department that we're not going away. You know, Chris, people don't like it when I say this, but it's actually true. It's sometimes hard to tell the difference between the Obama Department of Justice and the current Department of Justice in terms of transparency and their willingness to share information with Congress. This is a really simple request. Did you rely on the dossier? And if so, did you vet it before you relied upon it? You can answer that in 30 seconds, but it's taken 3 months for the Department of Justice, and only recently have they agreed to give us the information. So the battle is not just with House Democrats. Unfortunately, it's also with the Department of Justice to gain access to the information we need to wrap up this investigation.
What about the fact that...
So I already criticized that clip, but as to why the Department of Justice is reticent in providing information to Republicans investigating this, who are, you know, in some ways tools of the Trump administration, could that be because the warrants, the wiretapping warrants involve information they don't want Trump to know about yet? Because I'm sure even though Trump fired James Comey as director of the FBI, a lot of the rank and file in the FBI are still loyal to that wing of the FBI from some of the reporting I've read. So maybe that's what that's about. But as for the rest of the dossier argument and the way Fox News has been portraying it, most of it I think is bogus, and I think Representative Adam Schiff did a good job of explaining why in a clip here that also talks a little bit about the Uranium One deal and even sort of circles around back to the original topic of the Republican Party split and Senator Jeff Flake's complicity comment, you know, the "Daddy, what did you do in the war?" You know, when future generations ask, "What did you do when Trump was president? What are you going to say?" You'll see Adam Schiff comes around to that by the end of this clip, which we will watch together, and I will read your comments along the way and discuss it with you after we watch it together here.
We also learned this week that the DNC and the Clinton campaign, through their attorney, helped fund this Fusion GPS effort to create this dossier, the so-called dossier, on whether the Trump campaign was colluding with the Russians. We also know that the Washington Free Beacon, a conservative website, had been paying Fusion GPS as well. And this has now become a subject for Congress, congressional investigations, along with another investigation into the Obama administration's approval back in 2010 of a Russian investment in the U.S. uranium industry. The White House pointing to that and saying that this is a sign that there's collusion on both sides.
Well, here's, I think, the significance of who paid for Fusion GPS. We've known for really a long time that it began as a Republican effort. It was later picked up by the Democrats. So none of that is all that surprising. I think that is a factor to be considered in weighing the credibility of what Fusion GPS produced, who was paying for it.
Shouldn't it have been disclosed earlier?
Yeah, I can't answer that. I certainly would have, liked to know who paid for it earlier, but nonetheless, that's just one factor to be considered. It doesn't answer the ultimate question, which is how much of the work is accurate, how much of it is true. And my colleagues don't seem particularly interested in that question, but that is really the most important question for the American people, and that is how much of this allegation that Christopher Steele makes and the reports that he hears are true about the Russian government wanting to help the Trump campaign. Now, a lot of that has been corroborated.
Well, yeah, I wanted to ask you that question. There are some things in that dossier that have been proven untrue. For example, Michael Cohen, according to his passport, wasn't in Prague during the summer of 2016. What do you believe in the dossier has been corroborated?
Well, the most significant thing to me is that Christopher Steele may have found out, even before our own intelligence agencies, that the Russians were in fact aiming to help Donald Trump in the election. That has now been borne out by ample evidence from not only from individual sources, but also from the social media campaign, for example, very demonstrably pro-Trump, anti-Clinton. So that central conclusion has been borne out. Now, the question we continue to investigate is, was the campaign coordinating in the Russian help? Now, that still remains to be seen. There's certainly evidence that's highly suggestive of that in terms of the meeting in Trump Tower, but a lot more work needs to be done. But I do want to say this on the Uranium One situation. If the president weighed in with the Justice Department to get that investigation going by ordering them to lift this gag rule.
Well, the White House has said that Don McGahn did contact
the
Justice Department.
That's not only unethical, but it's a violation of Department of Justice rules. And if members of Congress are willing to essentially cover for that, or even worse, become complicit in that, and that was the word Jeff Flake used in what I think is the most significant speech in Congress in the 17 years that I've been there. If we allow ourselves in Congress to become complicit in unethical conduct by the president, in taking apart our system of checks and balances brick by brick, by intervening in the Justice Department with a gag rule, by interviewing U.S. attorneys in New York who may oversee potential prosecutions of the president's interests, by picking someone, confirming someone nominated to head the criminal division of the Justice Department who just happens to be the lawyer for Alpha Bank, we become complicit in that kind of conduct. We will have to answer to history.
It does appear that Republicans and Democrats on your...
And I'm getting to be more and more a fan of Adam Schiff. He's a California congressperson, and I don't know if he's aspiring to higher office. Dianne Feinstein's running for re-election. I thought he might be thinking of running for senator, or I don't know, could he be thinking of running for governor? That's going to be Gavin Newsom as the leading candidate for that, or is he thinking of running for president? I think he's doing a good job in this whole Russia investigation, and I normally don't like prosecutors, but I guess this job kind of requires a prosecutor, and he's a former prosecutor. So anyway, I enjoyed that general debunking of the GPS fusion scandal with the Russian dossier, and even the Uranium One scandal, and I'll have an even bigger debunking of the Uranium One scandal from Angus King, the independent senator from Maine, in just a minute. But I do have a 1-minute clip from the moderate Senator Susan Collins of Maine, Republican Senator Susan Collins of Maine, giving the one part of the GPS fusion scandal, which might be a federal election disclosure scandal that might actually be a real problem, but not Russian collusion, just a failure to adequately disclose campaign expenditures. And John Dickerson actually helps her along instead of asking confrontational questions, as I will probably say again after we watch this clip together over here.
Let me ask you about this so-called dossier, which is information that was gathered of all kinds about candidate Trump. The Washington Post reported this week that the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee paid for part of its creation. John Podesta, the Clinton campaign manager, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz came before the Senate Intelligence Committee and said, we don't know who paid for this. Well, that was before this Washington Post report. Sitting next to Podesta was the lawyer from the Clinton campaign who paid for the report. So these guys need to come back and sit down and tell the committee what's up.
They absolutely need to be recalled. It's difficult to imagine that a campaign chairman, that the head of the DNC would not know of an expenditure of this magnitude and significance, but perhaps there's something more going on here. But certainly it's worth additional questioning of those two witnesses.
And what about the Clinton campaign lawyer?
Absolutely. In fact, he more than anyone.
Let's go now to the criticism.
So, and that's Clinton lawyer Mark Elias, and there is this possibility of what they call where you sort of do money laundering by, the Clinton campaign is supposed to disclose all of their expenditures, but they gave like millions, 12 million, 9 million, 15, I've heard all these different numbers, especially on Fox News. They gave millions of dollars to Mark Elias, this lawyer, to do a bunch of things for the campaign, and all they disclosed was the money they gave to the lawyer, some of which was apparently spent on this opposition research, the Steele dossier, which has the golden shower information, as well as a bunch of other information that was actually the failure to disclose campaign finance expenditures, maybe there's something really there, like Susan Collins was saying. The whole idea that it's Russian collusion by the Clinton campaign, that's bogus. And as for the Uranium One deal, there are all sorts of reasons that it's bogus. Joy Reid on AM Joy this morning did a great job debunking it with this Republican operative who was on our program. If you're watching this as a recorded show, I'll put a link to the Joy Reid clip down in the video description. But Angus King also mentioned a really important fact about the so-called Uranium One scandal, which I will show as the final clip of the program tonight over here.
Joined again by Senator Angus King, independent senator of Maine. He's on the Senate Intelligence Committee. Senator, the White House and its allies on Capitol Hill and in the media have been eager to refocus attention from the Mueller probe and the Senate and House Intelligence Committee probes to instead talk about questions about the actions of Bill and Hillary Clinton. One of the issues is the Obama administration approval in 2010 of the sale of a majority stake in a Canadian uranium mining company to a Russian company. Take a listen to what President Trump had to say about this week.
I think the uranium sale to Russia and the way it was done, so underhanded, with tremendous amounts of money being passed, I actually think that's Watergate modern age.
Senator King, what's your response, and do you think Congress should investigate the deal or the FBI informant whose lawyer says he has information about Russian efforts to influence the Clintons to win support for the deal?
Well, I think the House, one of the House committees has already begun an oversight committee hearing. I always think oversight hearings are appropriate. I've been trying to understand this deal. I think the important thing that I learned in reading the background is the company changed hands, but the uranium that's mined in the United States cannot leave the United States. So it wasn't really the sale of uranium, it was the sale of a mining and manufacturing company. But there are questions about it, and I think you know, we need to get to the bottom of them. I don't think that there's, you have to try to find out the facts if there are questions raised, and I think, as I say, the House has already got something underway on that question. Hopefully we can get it resolved and keep moving forward.
We also learned this week that...
So the uranium never left the United States. It was just the proprietary interest in the mining company that shifted from a Canadian company to a Russian company. All the money went to the Canadian company. The whole, like, Uranium One scandal is bogus. It's been bogus for a long time. The fact that the Republicans and the Trump administration are bringing it up again, it just shows that they're trying to distract from something, whether it was Natalia Volotskaya or whatever that Russian lawyer's name was, who was in the June 16th meeting. I don't know if that's it, or whether they were trying to distract from these upcoming indictments or single indictment, or I guess we'll know soon what's happening there. But I noticed I had over 200 live viewers joining me, so I appreciate that. I appreciate Patrice's super chat contribution. I thank you, and of course Sandy thanks you, and I saw some of my longtime patrons and regular patrons joining me in the live comments. I also appreciate the monthly contributions I get from my patrons. Sandy also appreciates those contributions. Even if you can only give a one-time contribution, if you give me a one-time contribution through Patreon right now before October 31st, and then just cancel after Halloween, if I had like 20 people do that a month, that would take care of demonetization of an entire week of Liberal Viewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. So that would be awesome, or even close to that would be awesome. Anyway, Sandy's right over there getting restless. I want to finish up the show, but I hope you appreciate the 16 clips I picked out for you, my commentary and criticism. I appreciate the 200 or so of you who joined me live. I'll upload all the live comments, and also for the recorded viewers, I read all the comments. So thanks for those of you who just watch the show and share the show and give me supportive comments along the way, and also especially the financial contributions. And maybe I'll find the time sometime in the next week or two to make some other kind of video, like an edited, produced video. But until then, or until next Sunday when I'm back with LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup, I guess I'll be seeing all of you around the internet.